And that reading again comes from the Gospel of Mark, the 6th chapter. I'll be reading verses 1 through 6a. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church this day. He left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joses and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house." And he could do no deed of power there, except that he laid hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. This is the word of our Lord. Thanks be to God. Perhaps you recognize the name Will Campbell. Will was a maverick Baptist preacher in the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s. He was a preacher, an advocate, a farmer, and in fact he lived near here in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. It was there that he did most of his writing, and he wrote a beautiful autobiography called Brother to a Dragonfly. It was an autobiography of that time in our history of the civil rights movement, and it was also an elegy to his brother Joe, who had died a very untimely death. One of the narratives of this consummate storyteller relates an event of another time a hometown boy preached before his friends and family. Will was a teenager, and he must have been a very young teenager because by the time he was 17, he was an ordained minister. And it was Youth Sunday in that small rural church where he grew up. And he freely admits that it wasn't a very good sermon, and it wasn't preached very well. And in fact, the youth choir didn't sing on key a single song. But the folks there had only praise and thanksgiving for that service. That's how we like to think about home, isn't it? A place of acceptance and welcome and encouragement, a safe space, a place where we belong. Isn't that what we all long for? A place to belong. It seems a most basic human need. One of my favorite authors, Frederick Buechner, explores these thoughts so eloquently in his book, The Longing for Home. He says, in a world where it is often hard to believe in much of anything, we search for something to believe in that is holy and beautiful and life-transcending, that gives meaning and purpose to the lives we live. He captures such a deep human desire in that thought. Yet, when we take off our rose-tinted glasses, we must admit that we do not often find that in our places of origin. Will Campbell experienced that change of heart among the people of his roots as he began to see the world in a different way, a world where individuals of different races could be friends, a world where the rights of individuals of different races could be acknowledged and welcomed. He became a pariah in his hometown, in his denomination, in fact. I think Jesus may have empathized with what Will Campbell went through. You know, his hometown folks were originally astounded at his teachings, but then they turned against him. Mark doesn't tell us the content of what Jesus taught that day, but he does fully tell us the reaction of the people to what must have been Jesus' prophetic word. They could not see, nor could they accept a Jesus who did not remember that he was just Mary's boy. William Barclay sums up their feelings very succinctly when he says, so far from welcoming his message, the people of Nazareth resented it. What right had he to speak like that? Many motives were to combine that to lead to crucifying Jesus. But at the very beginning, he met the simplest and the most human of all, the prejudice of his fellow men. To the man who dares to be different and who fails to conform to the conventions of his environment. Barclay goes on to say, men hate to be disturbed, and women too, I'll have to say, especially by one of themselves. Thinking about the people's response to Jesus that day and to Will Campbell's experience 50 to 60 years ago led me to scurrying to find a book that for me was very meaningful a mere score of years ago in a time of great spiritual discernment. It was penned by Kathleen Norris, a poet, writer, speaker, Presbyterian layperson who chose with her husband to move from New York City to discover her roots in rural South Dakota. They moved into her maternal grandmother's home that had been left to Kathleen in her grandmother's will. And as an author and a granddaughter, she wanted to understand. She longed for understanding the stories of her roots. You know, the plains of South Dakota are still a very harsh place. But the pioneers that she longed to know about, her forebears had endured much more hardship and sacrifice. And she didn't want to know the romanticized version of those stories. She wanted to know the authentic understandings of how she came to be who she was. She began to wonder, can you tell the truth in a small town? That's the name of the chapter in which she explores her struggle as a writer to learn and to tell the truth and also to be true to herself in the process. And especially in a small town where expectations are set in stone and people who don't meet those expectations never really fit in. They never really belong. She writes in that revealing chapter, we don't tend to see the truth as something that could set us free because it means embracing pain, acknowledging our differences and conflicts, and taking our real situation into account. Let me read that again. That seems so important. We don't tend to see the truth as something that could set us free because it means embracing pain, acknowledging our differences and conflicts, taking our real situation into account. My friends, congregations are often like small towns. Don't we usually call ourselves a family or a community of faith? We share in all of the blessedness that community engenders in us, and also its more shadowy side that Norris explained to us. As your interim pastor, subject to approval by the Committee on Ministry, I will be asking you to look at the story of Second Presbyterian Church, past, present, and future. Every one of you is invited, I dare say exhorted, to participate in this endeavor. You see, it's not just the job of the interim or the session or the pastor nominating committee to prepare for the next pastor who will come to lead this congregation into the future. We make those preparations by taking off our own rose-tinted glasses and lovingly and truthfully looking at who we have been and who we are and who, with God's help, we want to become. We will metaphorically be on a journey of discovery. We will begin by looking at the deep and rich history of this congregation. Second has deep roots in this community, and I believe they are a firm foundation for building the future of this church. But let's not romanticize the past, but let's look clearly at the values that we have seen in our past that are strong and good and faithful. There are inspiring stories of courage and commitment in our history. I want you to take a moment now and look around you. Turn around and face the chapel and look at Jesus with hand upheld, blessing you. You know, he's doing that every Sunday. I love that window because I get to look at it all the time. You know, the words above the threshold of that window say, "As you do it unto the least of these, you do it unto me." This window was dedicated to Hattie Ackerman. She was a member of Second Presbyterian Church in the late 19th century. At that time in our city, when the yellow fever epidemic was a scourge of the city, everyone was leaving town who could. But she chose to stay, to minister to all of those who could not leave and who were ill. Her dedication to them caused her to catch yellow fever, and she succumbed to her illness. Embracing those other words of Jesus, "Greater love hath no man than to lay down his life for his friends." So I want us to find and share and remember those stories of faith that have made Second Presbyterian who it is. But we will also move to the more recent past and the present day. We will consider truthfully if there are areas of conflict or indecision or inaction that should be addressed. We will look at any wounds that need to be healed in order for us to move forward. And I will ask you to speak the truth in love, not to cast blame, but for each and all of us to take responsibility for the future of this church. Let us not run away from uncomfortableness like I do at any health concern that I may have. You know, if you were to look at my wrists today, I don't think that you would see any difference in them. Maybe one has more creases, but pretty much the same. But that was not always the case. You see, on the Christmas of my 6th year, Santa brought me a redwood picnic table with 2 matching chairs. How I loved that. It was the perfect place to do my workbooks and have my tea parties with my dolls. But we did not realize that there was a finishing nail stuck about this far up in the table. And I happened to hit my wrist, and it sort of pinched, but it didn't bleed. And so as I was prone to pitch hissy fits if I had to go to the doctor, my parents just left me alone. A small bubble appeared on my wrist, but it didn't hurt. It was just there. Until 13 years later, when I happened to hit my wrist, and a huge, disgusting boil came up on my wrist, and going to the doctor could not be avoided. So the boil was lanced, and as he began to look, he took some tweezers and he pulled out a portion of a finishing nail that had resided in my wrist for 13 years. Who knew? I guess my parents would have had me get that taken out a long time ago had they known. You know, we often avoid thinking about other types of wounds as well, hoping that they will just go away, get glossed over. But I think you know that they will come out in ways that we can't imagine, even after remaining dormant a long time. So I want us to deal with those in non-anxious ways, casting aspersions on no one. And lastly, my friends, we will dream together. God's prophet says, where there is no vision, the people perish. We will seek a vision not only of who we can be to one another, but who we can be to this community and in the world. We will not engage in wishful thinking about the glorious days of yesterday, which truly may or may not have been, but we will seek God's vision for the mission and the ministry of Second Presbyterian Church. As your interim pastor, and I hope I can use that after July 14th, it is not my job to impose my agenda on you, nor is it the task of any one person or group to do so. But it is incumbent upon each of us to prayerfully seek God's will. And if we are faithful and true in this process, I believe Second will continue to be a place where future generations can find a welcoming home. A place, as Buechner says, that is holy and beautiful and life-transcending, that will give meaning not only to our lives, but to the lives of our children and our children's children. Let us be about that task with courage and strength that we receive through staying centered in our own relationship with Jesus Christ. It is good that we celebrate this transitional time together by sharing in the meal that Christ has prepared for us.